himself to justice and love between his fellow human beings. He gave his life for that principle, and I think it's up to those of us who are here, his fellow citizens and public officials, those of us in government, to carry out that dream, to try to end the divisions that exist so deeply within our country and remove the stain of bloodshed from our land.
Opposed to both Kennedy and McCarthy, Johnson picked Vice President Hubert Humphrey as his heir apparent.
We've had some very severe blows lately, and we've got to try to bind up these wounds. And if this means, quite frankly, if it means that I don't have the time for campaigning like an ordinary candidate, that's the way it'll have to be.
Over the next 2 months, Kennedy and McCarthy continued their rivalry in the Democratic primaries. The contest reached a climax in California. Kennedy won. His assassin was waiting.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
McCarthy's campaign workers were watching reports of Kennedy's victory celebration.
We don't know who's going to
As we get more definite details, we'll bring them to you.
If you do not leave the room, we cannot get medical aid to the senator. Now, would you please stand and cause confusion?
What? Kennedy has been shot.
To help get medical aid to the senator, please leave the room.
Let me,
Somebody should stop Robert Kennedy. They're
this
trying
is Drinkwater.
Please, we need you immediately.
You were there, you saw what happened. Yes, I did. What? I'm sorry, I can't make any comments.
To many, Kennedy's assassination 2 months after King's seemed confirmation that the country was on the verge of chaos. Then came Chicago. Torn by strikes and braced for violence, Mayor Daley's city welcomed the divided delegates to the 1968 Democratic Convention. Relations between the police and the press corps were tense. Vice President Humphrey, choice of the party regulars, was assured of the nomination before he arrived.
Good to see you. Great.
But Humphrey and the Johnson administration were still targets of McCarthy's muted attacks.
I think the case is rather clear as to what's wrong about our involvement in Vietnam. And I think the case is rather clear as to what we ought to be doing about our problems here at home. It calls for some quiet and some restraint, a kind of backing off for a minute to look at America and to consider what we ought to be doing. And the nation has done that, and with your help and the help of others in these next 3 days, I believe that the Democratic Convention will do the same here in Chicago. Thank you very much.
Others had a different purpose.
Our position is that whoever the candidates are and whatever the platforms, that we must stay in the streets and stay in active resistance, or else there will be no peace, either in the ghettos or in Vietnam.
We don't know.
Do you have a permit to march any in particular?
No.
But you're going to march any?
Are you expecting trouble? We expect to march.
What does
We expect trouble all the time.
Thousands of highly visible protesters descended upon Chicago. Militants, pacifists, and hippies, with 500 undercover agents among them.
You are on our property which you are defacing. If you do not leave, you will be subject to arrest.
Some demonstrators were nonviolent. Others deliberately provoked the police.
These people are revolutionaries bent on the destruction of the government of the United States of America. They're a pitiful handful. They have almost no support, but by golly, they get the cooperation of the news media. They're built into something really big. Gentlemen, the hardcore leadership of this group are communist.
I told my partner, I says, grab your club and jump out swinging before they tip us, because we'd sooner fight than roast. So we jumped out, Well, I should say I jumped out first, and he stayed in the wagon to call for help. When we got out, I grabbed one. I hit another one down. And then somebody grabbed me from the rear and flung me into the crowd, and these dirty hippie son of a so-and-sos, they called me a mother-hunching so-and-so and a white fascist. Right, and they said, you're getting some of your own medicine. And then some citizen, I don't know who he was, but I wish I could find out, he stopped his car and jumped out with a little pinch bar. And he started helping us. Otherwise, I think they'd either killed me or crippled me more than what I am.
Amid the violence, talk of peace.
6 months ago in Vietnam, the only alternative before us was force or withdrawal. And I think that withdrawal would be totally unrealistic and would be a catastrophe. The second alternative, which I now speak of, is the conference in Paris. The negotiations are underway. They're not making a great deal of progress, but they are underway. Now, we've been seeking to get those negotiations for years. The roadblock to peace, my dear friend, is not in Washington, D.C., it is in Hanoi, and we ought to recognize it as such.
Over 4 days and nights, sporadic battles in the streets were echoed by angry debates on the war inside the convention hall.
It is altogether too late here for us to begin to discuss the merits of the war in Vietnam. That question has been presented to 7 million Democrats across this nation. That question was presented in the states where there are primaries, and the people have found an indictment of that war.
Those delegates to this convention do not know that thousands of young people are being beaten in the streets of Chicago.
Wisconsin is not recognized for that purpose.